I'm Dirk De Meyer. I'm the founder of DDM Architectuur, the architect studio that was making this house. So I graduated in the early 90s and started my own office a couple of years later. And well, after 25 years of career, I had the pleasure of making this house for my client here. So my practice itself is a practice based on a strategy where a design turns into a constructed project by following the process from the first sketches to the last finishing of the building. And to achieve that, I have a small staff that assists me in that whole process, because the key of my office is that I can be personally involved in every level of the design and construction of the projects. So I do not have an ambition to do a lot of projects, but I want to do better projects. So and instead of growth in number, I like to look for growth in complexity, sometimes the scale of the projects, so that I can always be directly involved and stay directly involved with the projects. And also the clients, they know who they talk to. They also have me as a contact person. So that's a little bit how the office works and how I would like to continue working. When working as an architect, people always ask, how do you design, or how would things look? And to be honest, most of the times I have no clue at all. I really see the value of having a clear concept, a clear way of working. But sometimes, well, maybe I have to say, unfortunately, I do not have that clear path from an idea to a design and then to a building. It is always a process of thinking about something, looking for something, going backwards, going forward. A client is asking something that could look like a minor detail, but that suddenly makes you rethink the whole design. So, but what I really think is important is that I always make the difference between a landscape architect and an architect. An architect, when he's done, he's gone, and it's like the project is finished. Yeah? While with a landscape architect, actually things only begin when he's gone. And I think we architects should keep that in mind, that actually our projects only begin when we are gone. So what I always try to do, and whether that's a house or a public building or a company building, is that I create a kind of platform, podium, on which things can happen. People can take it in their hands. I'm not afraid of people grabbing the space and doing something in it, because you have a kind of, you offer them a context in which they can do things. And then I'm very happy to see that things indeed happen. It's different from like interior design, where people ask you to define how things look, how things will be used. As an architect, I'm more offering people the chance to find out what they want, to kind of change things. You have a sofa like this, next year you might have another sofa. I'm not afraid of seeing 20 different chairs in a building. I remember my tutor that visited a house together with me, and it's a house he made 30 years before the visit. And he entered and he looked at the lady, and the first thing he said was, "But you changed the picture on the wall." And I thought that was so interesting that on the first hand, he remembered that there was a picture on that exact spot. Second of all, he dared to blame the client for changing the architecture. So he didn't create a space to live in, he created a space or a house where people had to live according to his ideas about how to live. And if people freely choose for that, it's not up to me to say whether it's wrong or right, but the face of the lady when she was like blamed by her architect for moving a picture felt like, well, is this the way I want my architecture to be? And I find it more interesting to be surprised when I enter the house, when the children have rebuilt the whole living room, or when a public building suddenly decides to turn the entrance from the front to the back. I mean, they can do that in many ways, and if it's a good way, I'm happy. Of course, a lot of less fortunate things also happen, but you have to accept that. I mean, once you're out of the picture, you give your project to the inhabitants, to the users, and you can hope that things will be fine. It's just like a child. I mean, a child is born and then it grows, and at some given point in time you have to say goodbye, not like goodbye forever, but you have to accept that a new life develops and that you have no control over it. And I think that's sometimes confusing, sometimes disappointing, but at the same time fascinating, because you also know that the better you do your job, the more options you have. And the better you do your job, the space that you created will still be there. So the design of this house started quite a while ago. Not only the design, also the search of the owner for this piece of land started a long time before. And it was quite important to see that this piece had a nice size, but that there was also a lot of trees, a landscape, an existing landscape in which an architect had to do something. But the major ambition was to live in this landscape. Yeah? On the site there was a traditional, what we call Flemish fermette, yeah, which is an old farmhouse style house in which you have a typology where the spaces are turned inwards. You have small windows. You have windows even with divisions in it. So the problem is that if you have a beautiful land like that combined with windows like that, you kind of lose the potential qualities of the house. But that I didn't need to convince the client about that. He just wanted to have a house that was looking at the landscape, enjoying the landscape. The only question was how to do it. Yeah? And there have been all kinds of sketches, and throughout the whole process, which took months, step by step we actually removed walls. We kind of opened up the house more and more to the landscape. And from that step-by-step process we ended up with this design. So there were like maybe 15 to 20 phases or different steps before we came to this design. In the beginning there were more walls, and then the question was, but what do we do with those walls? Because it's the nature, it's the green we like to see. We don't need to have a wall for a painting because we have the green, or in certain seasons the white or the brown, that is continuously changing and defining what we see. Yeah, well, I often explain to students and clients what I call the origin of forms. So like for this house we had, of course, the ground floor, which is on the earth. And then you have a roof. And if you have a roof, it can be very, very thin. And then you have a lot of columns. Yeah? And you can have less columns, but then the beam here will become higher. So at a given point in time, the client was curious whether he could get rid of all the columns, all the beams. So then you get a cantilever, which is very high, and then you have something here. But when you look at the structural strength in it, you immediately we'll see that the biggest, that actually this is where the structure should be. Instead of having a flat roof, we have sloped roofs. And then the nice thing is that if you have a person standing there, this is quite a high building. You end up at 6-7 meters if you have 2 floors. But then in this situation, we could go to 4 meters, which is very much more at a human scale. And then here we could have an extra room in the roof. So you kind of soften the whole house in its surroundings. Yeah, traditional houses, they have that kind of double floor, sometimes triple floor. Then they have a roof on it. So this is a very, very different way of being, of standing in the landscape. Yeah, and to combine it with the almost S shape, yeah, which gives us all the possibility for look-through, for walking around, looking at the landscape, having sunshine coming in from different angles in all the different rooms. That is how shape is shaped. It's not a choice. It's not a question of, do I like this or is it beautiful? It's more like, what does this place tell me? What does this project tell me? How does it want to grow? And all these steps here have been taken together with the client. So every couple of weeks we had a conversation and saw the progress, and then the client asked another question, and step by step we moved on. The same for the windows, yeah, to choose for heavy frames or very thin frames. We all made those visuals with different materials, different sizes. That's the design process, and that's how it looks the way it looks today. It's not that everything was clear from day one, not at all. It took us a couple of months to come to this result. So when you finally agree with the client what they need, what they would like to have, then of course it's the step-by-step process, like polishing a stone. You kind of have a big idea, and then step by step you kind of fine-tune the design. And at that moment in time, also the way to construct becomes a very important element in the design process, because that's where I think that a good architect can make a difference. Too much in today's architecture, there's a disconnection between the designer and the actual builder, yeah, and that leads to a kind of, it's a missed opportunity to fine-tune a project. As architects, we want to understand how things will be built, and through that process we refine not only the construction method but also the design. By studying a window detail, sometimes we do change our architecture, and our architecture will of course define what windows we need, but it's not so clear whether we have a window because of the architecture or whether we have a certain architecture because of the window. Both have a very, it is like a little bit like a black box. At a given point in time you don't know which design decision came first. But that's also the beauty, but the critical point is that a client needs to accept this process. He needs to be confident that at the end of the day we will have a nice solution, because it is not easy for a client to accept that this process will go forward and backward, and sometimes more backward and forward. And this is the beautiful side, and that's the gratefulness for a client that does accept that process to grow. It needs a certain time. And for us, when finally making the construction drawings, because that's where we have a very, very strong ambition, and we make the construction drawings from A to Z. We decide where the screws are, we decide which size certain pieces have. Not just because we like to do that, but also because it gives us a possibility to offer the project to builders and to understand what they need to do. And the builders need to have the love for the project, as much as we had the love for the design. They need to have that kind of ambition within their field to give the best they can give. And this is true for the people making the windows, the floors, the general contractors, the stone people. Everybody has to have that kind of love for their job, the project. So when designing, very, very quickly the materials come into play. And like for this house, it was a long process, first of all, to look for the right material for the facade, for the elevations. The reason why we ended up in natural stone is that all the other options felt either too technical. I mean, we thought about a green facade, plants growing, but we found out that that was a very green idea but needed an extreme amount of maintenance, which was a little bit like too much for the site. On the other hand, we had options for wood, but then the aging of wood is not at all as nice as you would like it. So in the beginning it looks great, and then after 5-10 years, definitely in a green environment, the wood starts not aging well, let's put it that way. And finally we ended up with natural stone, and definitely muscle calc as we used here has an intriguing quality of transferring colors and aspect within the season. You have natural stone, if you use it, things could look like a coffin. But with this stone, which has its veins, its holes, its greens, its browns, changing within the light, you do not really make a box in the landscape. The house becomes a piece that grew out of the landscape. And that's what we particularly liked about the muscle calc. But then, how do you use the muscle calc? How do you use natural stone? If you look at classical buildings, we see blocks. Yeah? And with blocks, you immediately have the idea of either horizontal lines, you have vertical lines, you see a structure. And because we already had the idea of making it like a stone in a forest, we shouldn't have a line which is showing horizontal or vertical. So from there we studied the patterns. So at a given point in time, the stone is not a stone anymore, but it is like a carpet. It's something dressed over the house. And this directionless pattern was also the inspiration for the flooring. For weeks we were wondering what to do with the floor, because the house has many directions and it's not orthogonal. So you could think forever which direction to put your floor in. So we also worked with that idea of Roman pattern for maybe parquet or maybe floors, but we always had the fact that somewhere the directions would meet. And then suddenly you would feel like, oh, I'm going from the orthogonal piece to the inclined piece. And by giving it another material named polished concrete, polished terrazzo concrete, you kind of make a carpet throughout the whole house where there is no direction. It becomes like, maybe like the beach or like your outdoor lawn. It has no connection between the front or the back. It's just slowly going from inside to outside, because the materials you use in the concrete are the materials you also find outside. So it gives that kind of, it integrates well with the concept and also with the surroundings. And a similar idea was the cladding of the supporting boxes in veneer, Larix veneer. We had proposals where we had them lacquered or painted, but immediately it turned the house into something very different. And by introducing wood, although it's been tinted with black oil, you bring back a certain tactility to the house, a kind of friendliness. In general, a wooden table feels comfortable if you compare that with a steel table. You immediately have not just a physical connection, but also an emotional connection with wood, which makes it connect not just with you, but also with the surroundings. You are in the middle of all the trees. So these are elements which not just came from the beginning, they are the result of a step-by-step process. When looking at this picture, you immediately see the importance of the natural stone. Yeah? And very specific for this project was the search on how to use the natural stone. Because generally when you see natural stone buildings, you have a pattern of maybe horizontal blocks, yeah, whatever pattern. Sometimes they have them in squares, yeah. But the disadvantage with this pattern is that you either have a very horizontal linearity or a vertical linearity. And then when looking in historical patterns, you find what they call a Roman pattern, which is actually a collection of 3 or 4 different types, where you have a square one, a rectangular one, actually it should be 1/3 higher, and then an even smaller one and a longer one. And you immediately see that if you start combining these, there is no left, right, top, down anymore. And this suited this house really well, because we had a kind of semi-organic shape where there is no horizontal line or vertical line. It is all about cladding, about dressing the whole volume. So this is how this pattern came to life, because as I said earlier, it's not just a choice for beauty, it's a choice for, you have a reason to choose this. And the reason here was that we didn't want a direction showing left or right or top or down, so that it would be more integrated in the surroundings, which neither have a direction. The earth, the trees, they're all going any direction except a very linear direction. So that's how the choice of materials and how they're built is being made throughout that process. And whether it's about the stones or about the windows, where we do research on small frames, bigger frames, stronger frames, this is all in the studio. It's all being prepared and then brought to the client so that they understand and can make choices together with us. When taking care of daylight, there has been a lot of elements involved, but as much interest or as much attention has gone to the lighting in the evening. We never should forget that a building in certain seasons only enjoys 1/3 of the time, that enjoys only 1/3 of the time of daylight. Yeah. So how do you live in that house in the evening or in the darker times is a very, very important element. And for this house, we've chosen to offer a very soft general lighting without making a focus on the light object or the light source. And by, together with the manufacturer, selecting a source where we could hide the bulb, we managed to get this result in this house. And the second thing about lighting is that it turns the house upside down. I mean, visually, what uses to be a dark place, namely the windows, when you look at the house, in the night it becomes a clear thing. And in this house with the look-throughs, because of the special plan, you kind of have a sequence of your living room, looking through a patio, looking over the water, and then you look into the other room. Quite recently, somebody made a funny remark about the project and saying, those people, they probably don't like arts. And I said, why do you think so? And he said, yes, but there's no walls to hang something. But I explained that the whole point of the house was that the nature, the green, was what they wanted to look at. The change of the seasons, the change of the growing leaves, the falling leaves, and that is a kind of perpetuum mobile of art. And this is why they chose this piece of land. This is why they chose this kind of house. Not because they don't like art, not at all. I mean, they listen to music, they look at movies, they read, and I'm sure they also have pieces of art. But for this specific house, it's the land, it's the trees, it's the green that plays an important role. And that's again connected with the zigzagging of the plan, the look-throughs, the shadow, the sun, the way the rain falls. Everything is about this house in this piece, on this piece of land.